She tried to evict me from the home I legally owned. What she didn't realize was that I owned hers, too. I used to think that buying a home in an upscale neighborhood was the peak of the American dream. A white-railed porch, manicured lawn, the sound of birds instead of traffic. That was the vision. Peace, stability, maybe even a fresh start. But I was wrong. Because just hours after my moving truck hit the driveway, I realized something terrifying. I hadn't just bought a home. I had walked straight into a battlefield. And leading the enemy charge? A woman with a tight smile, a beige cardigan, and a shiny HOA badge clipped to her chest. Barbara Whitman, president of the Brentwood Estates Homeowners Association. Now, I thought HOAs were just about keeping the hedges trimmed and making sure nobody painted their house neon green. But I never imagined that one day an HOA would try to kick me out of a house I rightfully own. Not because I broke the rules, not because I was a bad neighbor, but because I was someone they didn't want in their neighborhood. And that mistake would cost them everything. In this video, I'll tell you exactly what happened, from the endless violation letters and cold stares behind curtains, to the moment I flipped the entire HOA board upside down by becoming the legal owner of the president's house. You'll see how I fought back using strategy, not rage. How a suburban power trip unraveled in public. And the lesson this entire neighborhood won't forget anytime soon. They wanted me gone. But they ignited something they couldn't control. Watch closely, because this story might be your warning if you ever find yourself in a neighborhood with an HOA. I still remember the first time I turned onto Maple Glen Drive. The houses stood tall and proud, brick facades, white trim, wrap-around porches like postcards come to life. The air even smelled different, fresher, cleaner, like the world was finally telling me, you made it. Brentwood Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a statement. After years of saving, budgeting, sacrificing vacations, and working double shifts, I had finally signed the papers on a 2-store brick home with a southern-facing porch and a yard big enough to host cookouts, plant fruit trees, maybe even raise a family one day. To me, that house wasn't just a building. It was proof. Proof that I had survived, thrived, beat the odds. I pulled into the driveway with my car packed full, the moving truck trailing behind, and I swear to you, I actually exhaled for the first time in months. The struggle was over. It was time to breathe. Or so I thought. Because even before I stepped inside, something felt off. Not wrong, just off. Across the street, a curtain shifted. Someone peered through, then quickly vanished. 2 houses down, a man paused mid-dog walk and stared a few seconds too long. Another neighbor stood by her mailbox, watching, not waving. No smiles, no welcome to the neighborhood, just silence and stares. I shrugged it off. Maybe they were just private folks. Maybe they'd warm up in time. But deep down, something tugged at me. You see, I'd grown up learning how to read a room, especially when that room doesn't want you there. And this room, it was already whispering before I'd even unpacked a box. Still, I was determined to make this place my home. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, setting up furniture, hauling in boxes, cracking open paint cans. By nightfall, I was sweaty, exhausted, and happy in a way I hadn't felt in years. But the next morning, everything changed. A knock, sharp, precise, rattled my front door at exactly 8:00 a.m. I opened it to find a woman in a beige cardigan and pearl earrings standing stiffly on my porch. She held a clipboard like it was a weapon. Her smile was performative. "Good morning," she said, tone clipped. "I'm Barbara Whitman, president of the Brentwood Estates Homeowners Association." That was our first encounter. It wouldn't be our last. She handed me a stack of HOA guidelines as thick as my arm, pointed out that my trash cans were out too early, trash I didn't even put there, and gave me a look that said, "You don't belong." I told myself not to overthink it, that it was just policy, just protocol. But I had no idea. That knock on my door. It wasn't a neighborly welcome. It was a warning. And Barbara? She wasn't just a rule follower. She was a storm in beige. Because that knock was only the beginning, and what came next would prove that in Brentwood Estates, rules weren't just rules. They were weapons. She didn't smile. Not really. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided they don't like you, but want to look polite while saying it to your face. Barbara Whitman stood on my porch like a judge arriving early for sentencing. Cardigan neatly buttoned, pearl earrings catching the morning light, and a manila folder hugged tightly to her chest like it held the secrets of the world. "We like to maintain a certain standard here," she said, after a brief nod toward my moving truck still in the driveway. She didn't ask if I needed help settling in. She didn't welcome me. She handed me a packet of rules. No hello, just control. The HOA guidelines she gave me were dense, font size 10, single-spaced, stapled in one corner like a brick of bureaucracy. Lawn height requirements, paint color restrictions, mailbox shapes, even rules for the shade of light bulbs on porch fixtures. It read less like a welcome and more like a warning. Step out of line and we'll be watching. Then came the first petty jab. "I noticed your trash bins were out last night. They're only allowed out after 6 a.m. on collection day." I blinked. I hadn't even touched the bins. The previous owners must have left them out. Still, she didn't care, her lips pressed into a tight line like she was filing that excuse away as a strike one. That's when I realized. This wasn't about bins, it wasn't about guidelines, it was about me. My presence, my face, my existence in a neighborhood she believed she controlled. Let me be clear, at that point I still wanted to believe the best. Maybe she was just uptight, maybe she treated everyone like this. So I nodded, thanked her for the information, and said I'd take care of it. She left without another word, no goodbye, no neighborly nod. Just the sound of her heels clicking down the steps like a gavel hitting wood. And as I shut the door, a chill slipped into the room, not from the weather, but from the realization that this wasn't going to be easy. That first knock, it wasn't an introduction, it was an invitation. Into a game I didn't know I was playing. A few days later, the real rules began to show themselves. A warning notice appeared in my mailbox, then another, all signed Barbara Whitman, HOA president. They weren't just rules anymore. They were harassment wrapped in policy. Because if you think this was just about lawn care or porch lights, you haven't seen how far someone like Barbara is willing to go. When they feel their power slipping away, at first I tried to play by the rules. I really did. I mowed the lawn twice in 1 week. I swapped out my porch light for a bulb with lower wattage. I even replaced the mailbox, just to match the HOA's approved design list. Every time Barbara slipped another warning letter into my mailbox, I swallowed my frustration and told myself, stay calm, keep it neighborly. But then I started noticing something. While I was getting dinged for having a single weed in my flower bed, 2 houses down had grass so tall it looked like it belonged in a jungle documentary. While my trash bins earned me a violation for being out at 5:59 a.m., my neighbor's bins were still out at noon the next day. No letter, no complaint. And the porch furniture? Don't even get me started. Barbara wrote me up for having 2 wicker chairs and a small glass table on my front porch, said they didn't match the community aesthetic. Yet just 3 doors down, old Mr. Hamilton had a plastic lawn chair held together with duct tape and a rusty garden gnome doing the Macarena. No notice. No knock. No problem. That's when the pattern snapped into place. This wasn't enforcement. It was targeting. And the message was clear. This neighborhood has standards and you don't fit them. So I decided to run a little experiment. One trash day I woke up early and walked the block, camera in hand. By 9 o'clock I had over a dozen photos of bins still lined along the curb, some with lids flapping open, trash spilling into the street. I sent the pictures to the HOA board in an email titled, "Question about Equal Enforcement." I was polite, respectful, direct. And I got silence. But the very next morning, like clockwork, Barbara was back, clipboard in hand, standing on my porch without ringing the bell. "You'll need to submit proof of homeownership," she said, like I was a stranger squatting in someone else's house. That's when I realized Barbara wasn't just trying to find me. She was building a paper trail, one violation at a time, trying to stack up just enough to push me out legally. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being hunted. And the weapon wasn't a gun, or a threat, or even words. It was policy, twisted and targeted. That's the danger with rules. In the wrong hands, they don't keep peace. They protect power. Because while Barbara waged her quiet war against me, the people around me chose something far more damaging than hate. They chose silence. The thing about war is, not everyone picks up a weapon. Some people just stand by and watch you bleed. After the third HOA violation showed up in my mailbox, for overgrown hedges I trimmed 2 days prior, I decided to take a walk, not to calm down but to observe, to see the people behind the windows. It was a quiet evening. Golden hour spilled across the sidewalks like warm syrup. Dogs barked in the distance, sprinklers hissed from well-manicured lawns. And on one driveway I saw them. 6 or 7 neighbors gathered in a loose circle, chatting, laughing, sipping from solo cups. I figured it was a good moment to break the ice. I smiled, lifted a hand in a casual wave and walked a little closer. The laughter stopped. One woman gave me a tight, thin-lipped smile, the kind that's more apology than greeting. Another man, tall in a golf shirt and khakis, shifted slightly to block my view of Barbara, who stood in the center of the group. Arms crossed, mouth moving, eyes on me. I didn't need to hear the words to know what she was saying. Not one person spoke. Not one introduced themselves. I walked past like a ghost, my wave unanswered, my presence noted but unwanted. And that's when it hit me. Barbara wasn't just enforcing rules. She was engineering isolation. She didn't have to say, "Don't talk to him." All she had to do was label me a problem enough times for people to assume it was true. "He got another violation. I heard he's renting illegally. He's probably just here to flip the house anyway." Reputation becomes truth fast in places where people value quiet conformity over critical thought. And make no mistake, silence is a choice. Every neighbor who turned away, who stayed quiet, who didn't question the HOA's campaign against me, they chose comfort over courage. And that cut deeper than any letter Barbara could ever write. It taught me a harsh truth. In a neighborhood obsessed with appearances, belonging isn't about following the rules. It's about who gets protected when they break them. Still, I wasn't ready to fold. I wasn't raised to shrink when people stared. So I stopped waving. I stopped explaining. And I started documenting. If they were going to play this quiet war with passive smiles and sealed envelopes, then I'd respond the only way they'd understand, with proof. Because the next time Barbara came knocking, she wouldn't find fear on my porch. She'd find something much worse. Me, pre-prepared. Because when a storm is coming and the walls are closing in, the only move left is forward. There's a moment, right before a trap snaps shut, where everything is quiet. Deceptively quiet. That's how it felt the morning I found my 5th violation letter. This time, trash bins. Apparently, mine weren't pulled in within the approved 1-hour retrieval window. Never mind the fact that half the neighborhood still had bins sitting by the curb well into the afternoon. Never mind the fact that I had just gotten home from work, on time. That envelope wasn't about sanitation, it was a warning shot. A signal that Barbara wasn't slowing down. She was ramping up. So I did the only thing that made sense. I stopped reacting emotionally and started responding strategically. That weekend I became a man on a mission. Find 45 AIEM. I slipped on sneakers, slung a backpack over my shoulder, and walked the block like I was casing the place. Phone in hand, camera app ready. By 9:00 AM I had 27 photos. Trash bins out early, trash bins out late. Overgrown bushes, broken shutters, faded house numbers. Violations. Everywhere. None of them at my address. I compiled the images into a clean PDF. Each photo time-stamped, each address labeled. Subject line, Community Standards, Unequal Enforcement. And I sent it not just to Barbara, but to the entire HOA board. No insults, no drama, just facts. Silence. For 2 days, not a peep. Then, on the 3rd day, Barbara reappeared. Right on schedule. Same cardigan, same clipboard, same tight smile that never reached her eyes. Except this time, she didn't knock. She just stood at the edge of my porch like a shadow. "We've had complaints," she said. "About what?" "Concerns from neighbors about unusual traffic, unfamiliar vehicles, deliveries, no." Then she handed me a formal request. Proof of homeownership. I laughed, not loud, just under my breath. Because I knew what this was. Barbara wasn't enforcing rules anymore. She was laying a legal foundation. One letter at a time, she was trying to build a case. To question my legitimacy, to discredit my right to be there. She thought I'd get scared, that I'd pack up and leave. But what she didn't know was that I'd already seen the trap. And I wasn't planning to run. "You want proof?" I said. "You can check the public records." Her smile faltered, just a flicker, but it was enough. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just looked her in the eye, nodded once, and said, "Do what you have to do." Because when people play games with paper and politics, there comes a day when the truth walks into the room and flips the table. They thought I'd show up alone. They thought I'd be nervous, meek, out of place. But when I walked into that HOA board meeting, I wasn't the man they'd tried to isolate. I was prepared, calm, and carrying a stack of papers that would turn their little power game into a public reckoning. The room was full. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors whispering in low tones. Barbara sat at the head of the table, clipboard in place, expression neutral like always. "We're here to address ongoing concerns regarding Mr. Patterson's compliance with community standards," she began. But before she could continue, I stood up. "Actually, I'd like to speak first." She froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the board to notice. I stepped forward, pulled out a document, and held it high. "This," I said, "is the deed to my house, signed, filed, and notarized." A few heads turned. Then came the second paper. "This," I continued, "is the purchase agreement for another property here in Brentwood, 214 Oakwood Drive." Barbara shifted in her chair, but I wasn't done. "And this," I said, slowly lifting the final document, "is the deed for 216 Oakwood Drive." Her house. A wave of gasps swept the room like thunder cracking overhead. Barbara didn't blink, but the color drained from her face like someone had pulled the plug on her confidence. "You wanted proof," I said. "Here it is. You tried to evict me from my home, while living in a house that I legally own." I let the silence settle. Then I picked up the last file. "And since we're talking about violations, Barbara, you're behind on your HOA dues. Over $3,000 0 cents, according to the debt attached to the property I bought." The board members shifted. One whispered something to another. Even Vice President Stephen Reynolds looked like he'd seen a ghost. Barbara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Not denial, not outrage, just silence. "You've spent weeks targeting me," I said, voice steady. "But here's the real question. If I looked like you, would any of this have happened?" Nobody answered. Because they couldn't. I laid the final nail on the table, a formal complaint, this time from me, for harassment and abuse of authority. "I'm not asking for fairness anymore," I said. "I'm demanding it. Because truth doesn't just expose lies, it turns silence into outrage. And when a room full of bystanders finally opens their eyes, the real shift begins." The silence after my last words wasn't empty. It was heavy, like the air in a courtroom right before the verdict. I scanned the room. Eyes that had once looked through me were now locked on Barbara. Not with respect, not even sympathy. With doubt. Real, palpable doubt. Then came the voice that cracked it all open. "You really tried to evict the man who owns your house?" It came from the back. Mr. Holloway. Oldest resident in Brentwood, Vietnam vet, a man whose words still carried weight. Laughter rippled softly through the room, a nervous, awkward chuckle from someone near the window. Then another. And just like that, the spell broke. Neighbors started whispering, not about me, but about her. About Barbara. I thought she said he was renting. Why didn't she mention the overdue fees? Wait. He owns her house? It was surreal. Watching the same people who'd once looked away finally. Not because I shouted louder. Not because I got angry. But because I showed them the truth, in black and white. Barbara sat frozen, lips pressed together like a dam on the edge of breaking. Her power didn't collapse in one dramatic swoop. It unraveled, thread by thread. And the board? They were now caught in the middle of a public reckoning. I turned to Stephen Reynolds, the vice president. So, are the rules real, or just a suggestion for people you don't like? Stephen looked pale, adjusted his glasses, fumbled for an answer. But it wasn't needed. Because the crowd was no longer quiet. Lisa Hendricks, 3 houses down, stood up. I moved to formally remove Barbara Whitman as HOA president, effective immediately. Dead silence. Then a second voice chimed in. And a third. Hands started rising, some reluctantly, some with conviction. When the vote was counted, it wasn't even close. Barbara was out. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about the moment when people finally stopped looking the other way. When silence becomes complicity, and complicity becomes a choice they can no longer defend. That day, I didn't just win a battle. I reclaimed my place. Not just on my porch, but in a neighborhood that once pretended I didn't exist. Because for people like Barbara, losing power isn't the end. It's the beginning of their desperation. And she was about to learn. You don't file false charges against someone who's done being polite. I thought it was over. I thought removing Barbara from the HOA presidency would be the end of it. The truth had finally won, and I could get back to mowing my lawn in peace. But people like Barbara don't go quiet. Not when they've tasted control. Not when they've built their identity on being the one who decides who belongs and who doesn't. A week after the board meeting, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox. No HOA logo this time. Just a law firm letterhead, Davidson County Housing Authority. Inside, an official complaint, accusing me of being a fraudulent occupant. Barbara had filed legal documents claiming I was living in the home illegally, that I was violating housing ordinances, and that multiple residents had raised concerns about my ownership. No names, no actual evidence. Just concerns. It wasn't about winning. It was about wearing me down, burying me in paperwork, fees, appearances, stress. She wanted me to burn out, to give up, to move out, just to have peace. But what she didn't understand was, she had just stepped into my territory. Because while Barbara played HOA queen with warning letters and clipboards, I had something she didn't. A damn good attorney. Hey, Joe, I said over the phone. I've got a situation, and you're gonna love this one. Joe Martinez wasn't just my lawyer. He was a longtime friend. Former real estate prosecutor, ruthless in court and allergic to bullies. By the next day we had everything lined up. My deed, my closing statement, tax records, security camera footage of me moving and tab stamped. Even HOA emails from Barbara proving targeted behavior. We didn't just respond to her complaint. We countered. We filed a formal grievance for malicious prosecution, sought damages for emotional distress, defamation, and abuse of authority. Attached every violation notice, every ignored email, every photo I'd taken. Because sometimes the only way to stop petty control is with real consequences. Barbara's silence in court was louder than any argument she could have made. Her attorney never even filed a rebuttal. Because facts? They don't bend. They don't care who used to run the HOA. This isn't about a trash can or a porch chair, I told the mediator. This is about someone trying to legally erase me because she couldn't control me. That shut down the room. And when the dust settled, not only was the complaint dismissed, Barbara was ordered to pay my legal fees. She had tried to destroy me with red tape, and wound up choking on it. Because just when I thought she'd fade into the background, she came knocking. Not with a warning, not with a threat, but with an offer she never imagined she'd have to make. I was on the porch when I saw her. Same cardigan, same stiff posture, but something was different. This wasn't the Barbara who handed out violations like Halloween candy. This Barbara looked smaller, and she wasn't alone. Her husband, Richard, tall, wiry, perpetually frowning, stood beside her, arms crossed like a failed shield. They stopped at the edge of my driveway like they were stepping onto foreign soil. "We want to talk," she said flatly. I took a sip from my coffee. "Talk about what?" Barbara hesitated, eyes shifting to the house behind me. Her house. The one I now legally owned. "We'd like to discuss a potential buyback," she said. "Of the property?" She couldn't even say home, because now it legally wasn't. I stood slowly, arms crossed. "You mean the house you tried to evict me over? The one you lost at auction because of unpaid HOA fees?" Barbara flinched. Richard cleared his throat. "We're prepared to offer what you paid for it." I laughed, quiet, short. "You're not buying a used bike off Craigslist, Barbara. This is real estate. That house, my house, is worth triple what I paid, and I didn't twist anyone's arm. You lost it." Her voice tightened. "You're just trying to make a profit?" I stepped off the porch, closing the distance, calm, controlled. "No, I'm just giving you the same courtesy you gave me. None. You wanted me gone. You tried to break me with rules, complaints, and fake charges. Now you're asking me to undo it all because the game didn't go your way?" Barbara's hands trembled slightly, not rage. Real fear. Because for once she wasn't the one holding the pen, the clipboard, the power. "How much?" Richard finally asked. I looked at the house, looked at them. "Market value, $450,000, 0 cents. Cash or financing, your call." Barbara's face flushed. "That's extortion." I shrugged. "That's fairness." They left without another word. And a month later, the for sale sign went up. Barbara and Richard moved out in the middle of the night. No goodbye party, no warm send-off. Just cardboard boxes, a rented van, and a legacy collapsed under the weight of its own ego. Funny, isn't it? The woman who once held the rulebook, now forced to play by it. Because Barbara wasn't just removed, she became a warning. And in the quiet that followed her exit, something even more powerful took root. Accountability. Barbara left without a word. No farewell letter, no final HOA memo. Just a for sale sign that sat crooked on her lawn for 2 weeks before it vanished, along with her. But the silence she left behind, that lingered. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid eye contact now gave hesitant nods. Some waved, some even spoke. A few muttered apologies wrapped in awkward small talk. And slowly, things changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but like spring after a long winter, subtle, patient, real. The HOA, now under new leadership, stopped hunting down porch furniture and began addressing real issues, like the busted drainage at the corner of Maple Glen, or the neglected community park that hadn't seen a repaint in years. People started attending meetings, not to complain, but to contribute, to listen, to ask questions, to care. And for the first time since I moved in, I felt like a neighbor, not a target. But here's what stuck with me the most. One afternoon, a knock came at my door. It wasn't Barbara. It was Lisa Hendricks, the same woman who'd once offered me nothing more than a tight-lipped smile at a driveway gathering. She stood there holding a plate of cookies, her son tugging gently at her sleeve. "I know it's late," she said, "but welcome to the neighborhood." I took the plate, took a breath. "Took you long enough?" She laughed, nervously, but it was real. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to force a smile back. Because this wasn't about cookies. It was about recognition. About someone finally saying, "We see you, and we were wrong." Here's what I learned. Power doesn't come from a title or a clipboard or a rulebook. Real power is the ability to stand your ground when the world tries to erase you. It's telling the truth when silence is safer. It's refusing to fold no matter how lonely it gets. Barbara's downfall wasn't caused by one mistake. It was caused by a lifetime of believing she could bend others until they broke. But sometimes, the one you try to break is the one who rebuilds everything you thought you controlled. And to those watching this, if you've ever been the outsider, the quiet one who got blamed, overlooked, or pushed to the edge, just remember, you don't need their permission to belong. And you don't have to yell to be heard. Sometimes, all it takes is the truth, delivered at the right moment, to turn the whole room around. They tried to write me out of the story, but I didn't just stay in it. I rewrote the ending,